Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Strange Dominions Podcast. I'm your host, Octavian Graves. This is our first episode of March, our third month in existence, and we're very, very excited for this one because we have Cain Del Sol on, who is a musician and author. He has been with Grave Gnosis since their beginning in 2015, and he has written a book, Codex of Erisum, which came out in 2021. We speak on many things from his music to his book and the contents within, his personal philosophy on the occult and the esoteric, as well as some of his stranger and more paranormal experiences. Our Patreon is active, and there is an episode on there already. If you would like to get access to exclusive content, you can become a patron for $4 a month, and for a few dollars more, you can get extra episodes as well as patches, pins, stickers, and the opportunity to be on the show. If you have seen something strange or unusual, such as Bigfoot, Dogman, ghosts, aliens, fae, and anything in between, send us an email at strangedominionspodcast@gmail.com. And that also includes if you are a esoteric practitioner and you've had something weird happen revolving around your practice, also send us an email and you can be on the show. The email address again is strangedominionspodcast@gmail.com. That is strangedominionspodcast@gmail.com. And with that, let's get into the show. And that was a bit of the track Saturnalian Majesty from the album Lux Negretto from the band Grave Gnosis. And we have the leader of Grave Gnosis here with us tonight. Cain, how you doing?
I'm doing quite well, thank you. How are you?
We are doing fantastic, and we are so excited to have you with us tonight.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
So for the audience listening at home, we are speaking with Cain Del Sol, author and musician and occultist. So Cain, we have been friends for about 5 years, and there's been an interesting initiation of you, me, and Alden. Alden and I actually met at a Grave Gnosis show. I can't remember the exact date. I want to say like June 24th, 2016. It was Grave Gnosis, Mehenet from Louisiana, and Skit Christ from Pennsylvania. Do you remember that show?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely remember that show.
Yeah.
I believe Algol from the Hennet actually was running around the pit with a hatchet.
Yes.
Yeah, he was passing around the skull cap.
Yeah, he likes that. It's a nice little shtick.
Well, both Grave Gnosis and Mehenet put on like one of the best shows I'd seen in a long time.
Well, we definitely appreciate it. We try to strive for excellency in everything, and I know that Mehenet does, without a doubt. And they hit the mark every single time.
Yeah, they really do. And their new album is amazing, as well as the new Grave Gnosis album. And the EP that you just put out is fantastic. I just got the tape myself.
Good to hear, and thank you very much. Have you had a chance to listen to it yet?
Yes, I have. And I have to say that the quality is really, I mean, it's amazing, but there's a good balance between, like, clarity and that kind of analog fuzziness from the tape, and it just adds a lot of atmosphere to it.
Yeah, I try to hit that as much as possible, to be honest. I have a lot of influences from a wide variety of genres and backgrounds, and I really just wanted to hit this kind of perfect niche that I thought of for the really high-quality production and that dark, gritty, just nasty feeling that a lot of black metal and noise gives you. And I try my best to hit that in every chance that I get, and I think I'm getting there.
Well, the technical ability on it is really really outstanding. I mean, the time changes and just how you play your instruments and how the whole band sounds together is it's just really really good.
I appreciate that. And unfortunately, the rest of the band, I have to torture with it because try playing that live. I think most of that second song, the Sentience of Fire, is in 5/4, so not exactly common time.
No, not absolutely, but it still makes it really interesting. But you and Grave Gnosis have been a pretty big influence and entity within Alden and I's friendship. Pretty much the day after that show, Alden and I met up for the second time ever. We met at that Grave Gnosis show, and then the second day, we went to Guitar Center together to get instruments to start a band.
Yeah, I recall that, and then I do recall following that from actually I think that moment. I have a very distinct memory of I believe it was the two of you actually in front of me when I was at the merch booth and we were talking about something, and I don't know what it was that we were talking about, but something just seemed to click in both your heads, and you just looked at each other with this very distinct look, and then looked back at me and we continued our conversation.
Yeah, that was the birth of many creative outputs that Alden and I have been on together.
Yeah, your work has been something of a catalyst for us. We're over the moon to have you on here.
Well, I definitely appreciate that, and that's exactly what I was hoping for. The I feel like the greatest goal of any artist is to inspire someone, and specifically to inspire them to create themselves. So I greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, man, of course, and we fully agree with you. So one of my favorite things about talking to you over the years, and we've talked many times and have met and hung out in person, is that when you and I talk, we tend to it feels like we've come to many of the same conclusions independently and share this kind of mutual gnosis about reality, magic, and the occult, and other topics such as that.
Yeah, I could agree with that. And I think that's something that is common for a lot of people that follow these types of paths. If you're on the real path, then it doesn't matter what you call certain things. It doesn't matter exactly when you hit these certain notes or what you see them as. It's still the same thing and you can recognize it in someone else. And I feel that that's exactly what we've been experiencing.
Absolutely, and that's kind of what Alden and I have been trying to create with this podcast. We hope that the people that find it and enjoy it come to many of the same conclusions and ideas that we put forth on this show independently of us, and just kind of listen to us and it clicks in their head like, oh, okay, this stuff that I've been contemplating and experiencing myself, these guys have experienced it and contemplated it themselves, and it's just a nice collection of shared experiences and theory.
Yeah, and I do love when people share their own experiences and theories, and it does kind of hit that point of how to put it. I guess you could say, "Hey, I know that. I call it something different, but I know exactly that."
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what the right word for that would be.
Yeah,
But
I'm not sure there's an English word for it, but
no, definitely not.
yeah.
Probably a German word. They have words for the weirdest like feelings and encounters that we just wouldn't think of putting into like a single word.
To be fair, I think that they just kind of combine words however they want at this point. So
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I wanted to start off with is you are a Satanist. At least that is what you would describe yourself to be, correct?
yes, theistic Satanist.
Okay. Now, when we talk about the left hand path, there are many different facets of that. And from reading your book, it's very, very unique. There aren't a lot of exterior influences from what I see. And so I'm just curious about how you got started in this and where you come from, and how this all came to be.
Well, that's kind of a long story. It literally starts back in my childhood because when I was very young, I'd have nightmares every single night, and I was raised in a very, very strict Christian home. So I was always told, nightmares were the tools of the devil. And so I literally prayed for the nightmares to go away. And as I was praying, I would always see shadow figures, shadow people, and they, walk across my walls and uh, in the hallways. And then if I was out at night anywhere, I would see them between the trees. And I always thought, these are demons. These are things that are out to get me in some way, drag me to hell and stuff. And of course, I mean, now I kind of have the same idea, just in a different light. But back then, I was very, very scared of everything, and I guess that fear, I kind of got sick of it. So I sat myself down in the dark one day and decided that I would not get up until I was no longer afraid. And I tried to make friends with the shadow people, and I ended up listening to them. And so when I got a little bit older in my teenage years, I started looking through a little bit more. That was around the time when we got the internet for the first time. So I was able to look online, and I found out, hey, other people have these same experiences. And just like I said before, it was I know that. I call it something different, but I know what that is. So I started looking into anything from any religion or any culture, anything that could show me what it was that I'd been seeing since I was a kid. And of course, I was fascinated with cryptids and all that kind of stuff. So of course, I fell down that rabbit hole, looking for various things like what would a real life Leviathan be, things like that. Just trying to explore in every facet. And then eventually, I came into Satanism because it had a concept. Well, of course, I guess I can't say Satanism in general, but the various facets, because they are many, do often have some sort of a semblance of an idea of what shadow walkers are. But they have some idea of it, I'd say, probably because most of the people that end up going to Satanism or to the left-hand path or to the general dark side of the occult are going to be spurred on based off of their own experiences. And from what I've seen, shadowy figures in various aspects are one of the most common apparitions out there for some sort of negative force or perceived negative force. So, of course, other people that then called themselves Satanists would have a name for them. So I followed that. And after years of trying to basically join up with people and join their temples and, learn their ways and get these books and all this kind of stuff and realizing, wow, these guys are pricks. I just ended up saying, you know what, I'm going to do it myself. I'm not going to go based off of anything that someone else has called this by or what they are working with. Because you know what, even if they look the same, what I'm seeing may not be what they're seeing. And maybe they misinterpreted something, or maybe this thing has something else specifically for me. Maybe it wants a specific message or something to come to me that is not going to this person. Who knows? So when I was about, I think it was 15, I sat down and performed my first actual ritual and called upon Lucifer and the rest of the dark hosts, I guess you could say, the other side, to guide me towards what I sought. And that was, how did I phrase it? I still use this often, actually. The eyes to see and the mind to understand all things around me so that I may bring greater glory to Satan. And my life's been a spiral ever since.
That so much of what you just said resonates with me on a personal level, but it also, and here we go again with us coming to multiple conclusions independently, it goes hand in hand with my inspiration to start this podcast and the journey that me and Alden have been undertaking with it, specifically with the shadow people comment about you trying to make friends with them. When I started this podcast and when I started my own magical path, I still don't really know what path I want to take. I'm still kind of in the initiatory stages of it, of learning each and every path, how they work and how you can use them to manifest your will and other topics such as that. But the thing that I felt very called to, I guess, is the relationship between the esoteric and the paranormal, and how I felt that there was a very, very clear connection, and no one was really talking about it. And I felt like if there is a way that people could use magical means to communicate and even form some kind of like a reciprocal relationship with the entities that people experience accidentally, then that would bring about a greater understanding and greater power of sort of unraveling the mysterious aspects of this reality. And so I think that's part of the reason why Codex Aversum, and that is the book that we're talking about tonight, is Codex Aversum and your philosophy. And I think that's one of the reasons why it like called to me so much. Because if I'm being honest, this is one of the very first actually like magical books I've ever read. I have been into the esoteric and the occult since I was a kid, but I had a very adversarial view on reading. It was always hard for me to pick up a book and actually sit down and read it. And the only exception to that would probably be Lovecraft. I mean, I've read pretty much every story I could find of Lovecraft, and I still consider him to be my, like, in the top 3 of my favorite authors. And I see, and you and I have talked about Lovecraft and his connection with the occult and things like that. And so I'm really glad that you just brought that up about the shadow people. The other thing is that you said that when you got into it, you wanted to join up with all these different orders and these temples and things like that, and you realized that they were kind of dicks. And I also had a very similar experience, and I think I brought this up on a previous episode, where when I really wanted to get into magic back when I was like 15, 16, I was going to black metal shows and metal shows in general, and I would try and find the people that I saw that kind of looked magical or looked like they were into it, and I would go up to them and ask, like, hey, I really want to get into this, but I have no idea how. I don't understand the actual process of doing magic and how to get started with it. Can you show me, or could you give me some pointers on how this is done? And I was always met with the same response, which is, if you have to ask, then it's not for you. And that just drove me nuts. And so I kind of put it down for a while until the last 2 years, when I really started to think about it and want to practice it. So when we talk about other branches of the left-hand path, the things that come to mind are like Current 218, Temple of the Black Light, the Draconian Order, Temple of Set, the Church of Satan, which is actually kind of an atheistic point of view. And I'm just curious about if you've had any dealings with these other branches and what your opinions are, especially considering black metal and its obsession with Satanism and the different kinds, and how you're in a black metal band. And so I'm just curious about how, like, if any of these other, what your interactions have been with these other currents and orders.
Well, my interactions have been generally hit or miss. Primarily because of exactly what you described as your experience. There's a great deal of people within just the occult in general that for some reason feel like you shouldn't talk about it, as if the occult is hidden by our means, that we're supposed to keep it secret. And honestly, I'm of the opinion that that's how you get another Library of Alexandria, and we all know what happened there. So I generally, whenever I run into people like that, I do not get along. It's that simple. If we are truly of the occult, and we are truly of these hidden mysteries and everything like that, then we should also be helping those that are seeking these same things in any way that we can. There are certain aspects that you can't just tell people, but you can point them in a direction and say, go off. And that's kind of what I try to do as much as I can, because you can give people an idea, but if you try to control their response to it or their interpretation of it, that's how you get these dogmatic, truly oppressive types of currents, I guess you could say. And that happens a lot, especially in Satanism, because Satanism is a catch-all for the type of occultist that is fresh into it. That's also why there's so many Satanist orders that are atheists as well, because they want to dip their toe in without going all the way. They want the look and the aesthetic without actually doing anything about it. And most of the time, the people with this bad attitude are going to be the neophytes, the ones that haven't actually gotten really far into anything at all. But they've read enough and understood enough to feel superior. So they do their best to just keep other people out. And I always have bad experiences with those. And generally, that's how I can tell if someone is really not well versed in their own path, is if they just shut conversations down, or if they try to tell you, oh, that's not how this is. Generally, that means they don't know what they're talking about, and they don't want you to question their own opinions on things. They want you to accept it as is, which in my view is a very Christian way of going about things. And I don't know about you, but I got into Satanism to get away from the church. So,
and I mean, and you know me, and we've been friends a while, and you know that is also one of my biggest goals in anything in the occult, is trying, or anything in life really, is just trying to get as far away from the Abrahamic, but a larger goal is to get away from dogma itself, and I'm well aware that is in itself a dogma, but I feel that it's the one dogma that I can swallow, which is just to get away from any kind of dogma. And I think that's one of the really enjoyable parts of your philosophy in your book, is that it doesn't have a dogma because it's against everything. Everything is an enemy. And I think that really, it's a very fresh look at a lot of these sort of archaic, dualistic, dogmatic views that people are putting on something that really should be avoiding dogma at all costs.
Yes, and that is exactly how it's intended as well, because the dogmas aren't going to assist anyone in seeking deeper mysteries or greater truths. It's just going to hinder them. And it's just going to confuse people, and it does. And we see it every single day. And people have Stockholm syndrome with that sort of stuff too. That's why we have these people, as I mentioned before, where they're just trying to assert their own dominance through their perceived knowledge, when really they've just scratched the surface. And the way that I try to structure and, I guess, formulate the language in the Codex Versum is to make it clear that these entities that I work with, these are the names that I know them by, but you may know them as something else. They may manifest as something else to you. In fact, you can even use the formulas, and you can use the things that I learned from them and apply it to your own path, because it's not about, hey, you have to do this way, this that way. No, it's about learning from our peers and our predecessors to reach greater heights and deeper depths.
That is such a the way you put that was really well worded, and I really enjoyed that. Getting into the book, the one thing that I wanted to start off with is your perception of devotion. And if I'm understanding the book correctly, the proper way to get into your philosophy is basically to get into it fully and let it absorb you and become essentially obsessed with it. And anything that is not obsession is faltering. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. Otherwise, it's not devotion.
Well, and I agree with you. I think that one of the things that I've always heard is within both the esoteric and the paranormal, a lot of people say, well, don't get obsessed by it because it'll ruin your life. If you base your entire life around it, then it'll, take everything from you, and you'll be left with nothing. That's kind of goes into like Bigfoot and the idea that the curse of Bigfoot, that when people experience it, it becomes an obsession, and they're constantly looking for it, and they can't find answers, and people lose their marriages, they lose their jobs because they spend so much time on Bigfoot. But in your book, you basically say, yes, let it take over, let it become your life. And so I'm curious to know about, was that easy for you to get into? Was there any kind of hesitation about letting the occult kind of consume you?
Well, there's absolutely hesitation. There's always hardships about it, and especially when you have these things that make it very clear that either it's all in or nothing. And I feel like there is a balance there, because my point with in this, I guess, could also translate to the cryptids and like the Bigfoot hunts, things like that, as you mentioned, is if you're not getting answers, then the goal at that point, the idea at that point is not to just dive in 10,000% and let it destroy you. It's to elongate your life and your searching. And it's the difference between actually taking so many years to do so and do so efficiently versus trying to throw yourself in head first and get lost in the wilderness and get eaten by a bear. I mean, and the way that I would describe it with the Satanists, with the actual demonolators and everything, is your God, your daemon doesn't want you to throw yourself into fire and kill yourself or maim yourself. What it wants is a long life of devotion that is successful and gives people a reason to praise and follow this demon as well. It doesn't want just one brightly burning but very quickly burning candle. It wants a million of them that burn long.
That's and I resonate with that a lot, because that's kind of, as I've delved into the different forms of magic, specifically here ceremonial magic. There is, and we had a ceremonial magician on the episode before this, and one of the things that they talked about a lot was the idea that you can become friends and buddy up with the demons in like the Goetia, and how that is not true, and that they do not want to be your friend. They don't want to interact with you when you bring them into the physical sphere. It is a you're pulling them in against their will, and one of your jobs in order to get them to do what you want them to do is to tame them and appease them, but not devote yourself to them, or think that they care about you in any way. And so I'm curious about what your opinion is on that.
I disagree a great deal with ceremonial magicians, specifically those with the Solomonic traditions. I feel that it's closest as you can get to enslavement as you can. It's very aggressive form, and it's honestly extremely arrogant, in my opinion. I feel that there are other ways to contact these entities, and I know that there are. I know quite a few people that contact many of these entities, or at least what the Solomonic magicians believe are these entities. I know quite a few people that work with and are, I guess you could say, buddy with these demons, Belial, Beelzebub, and in their various names, and work with them, and do have a very intimate relationship with them, I guess you should say, where it is an everyday thing. Where I guess that's the big difference too. Is with magic and ceremonial magic specifically, you have a lot of people from the outside looking at it saying, "Oh, well, it's magic. It's going to be this big to do, and it's got to be vibrant and flashy." And that's not really always the case. A lot of the times when your gods talk to you, it's not going to be some great flash of light and a booming voice. And sure, it could be. It could literally paralyze you for the moments while it's speaking. But it could also be a fly crawling across your arm out of nowhere. It could be a certain way that the wind pushes through a single tree. And for me, a lot of times it could be a very specific smell. Um, one of my pantheon likes to make his presence known with the smell of rotting flesh, and I've learned to welcome that. It kind of smells sweet now, but whenever I smell that, I always know that I should be paying attention to something, and it can be anything too. And that's kind of where the demonologist and the Solomonic magician differs. Is we do want that closer relationship. We know that it is a possibility, and we experience it in our everyday. Uh, sure, especially at the beginning, they don't care about you, and a lot of times you do need to make yourself worth it. But that's part of our goal here is to make ourselves vessels for them, to make our work worthy of their name, so that it can spread.
Um, one of the things that I was thinking about actually just earlier today, going back through your book for a refresher, in relation to the ceremonial magician that we spoke to recently, one of the major differences that I noticed, while also drawing some parallels in, at the very least, the nature or the entities themselves that you both deal with, is that a lot of what he was talking to us about was a lot of sort of magician safety, like protective circles, banishment, and everything, because as Octavian mentioned, he does not feel that there is the ability to have that kind of partnership. There is more of that, you need to put yourself in a position of authority, whereas you sort of work with them in the inverse to that, like letting them in. You speak a great deal to possession. And I'm curious about how greatly does the result differ? Basically changing those positions.
So that's kind of not 100% certain how much it could differ, because I'm not at heart a ceremonial magician. You'd have to ask a ceremonial magician, especially someone who is well versed in it, exactly what the results of that could be. I can tell you the results of mine, but a lot of the codex, especially anything that does parallel ceremonial work, is done there purely for the sake of allowing people who have different backgrounds to understand what we're doing here and what is being done through the text itself. Um, I have worked in ceremonial, and I can work in the ceremonial setting, but it's not very conducive to me. The most that I use it for, I guess you could say, is for my own purposes. And I guess the best way to describe it is kind of how you did, and it's the inverse of the Solomonic. And that's actually a lot of where inspiration for some of the larger seals came from, is an absolute perversion of the Solomonic tradition. There is the seal of the averse name specifically was formulated and a kind of a warped form to completely inverse the Solomonic work, which is actually interesting too, because as a little aside, sorry, I had someone working with Paimon in the Goetic, the Solomonic tradition for a while, and then during their rites, they ended up at one point using the seal of the averse name, and it completely changed their work. It was rather interesting to see, but anyway, that's a different story altogether. So with us, with our work, the ceremonial side of things is to strip you of everything that you consider to be you. It's to remove any bounds of ego, of conscious attachment, so that the other, that thing that you work with, the demon, God, whatever you want to call it, can enter and work through you. And the goal of using ceremonial magic, at least in my system, is to no longer need to use it. I actually quite often say that it's like psychedelics. It's going to tell you at one point, you need to stop. You should use what you've learned. Take it and apply it and make it outside of these things. And that's kind of what we do here. We take the structure and we take the formula and we apply it, and it kind of melds into your body, into your psyche, and adapts to how you specifically view things. And in that case, I feel that our work is faster, I guess you could say. I know that a lot of ceremonial magic, specifically Solomonic work, when you get into the larger rituals, can take a long time, like months. And we do have our own rituals that last, a certain amount of time. We have members that have done rituals nightly for months at a time. I myself have gone through, I guess, what I could call chronic possession, where I allow one of the spirits to enter and to basically stay as a co-pilot, I guess you could say, for between one full moon to the next. And so once you get the actual structure down, once you get the formulaic aspects down, you can do this anytime with anything. I knew a man that he's a great magician, because you would never know just by looking at him that he's a magician. He said when he started, he had to have like a special athame made out of a specific metal, and had to have his altar pointed in a specific way, and a goblet that was so many decades or centuries old, and like special things for it, and a certain seal. And he's like, now my chalice is a solo cup, and my athame is a toothpick, and I get more results than I ever did back then. And he said at that point, one of my favorite lines, Satan has been good to me, and I will never go back.
I'm trying to think of how to put what you just said, because I really, I there's a lot to unpack there, and I enjoyed all of it.
Sorry, I tend to do that.
No. We want you
I tend to kind of ramble.
No, that's what you are here for. Trust me.
I did have a thought actually just now. In your book, you mentioned the nature of these spirits being somewhat malleable to the way that they are currently perceived or named, or even just by the individual working with them. And I'm wondering if the reason for that sort of inversion to the way that you entreat with these entities versus the way that a ceremonial magician would has to do with the fact that how much of it is you are performing this ritual in a way that means it to you, in a way that means I am communicating with this being in a way that makes sense to me, in a way that I perceive it, versus a ceremonial magician using the tools that somebody else used. The perceived danger that they feel, could that be a result of, in your opinion, that sort of disconnect with forming the ritual itself?
Yeah, I 100% do believe that is actually the case. And that is part of why we ended up starting this in the first place, is because one person's tools will work for them in a certain way, but it may not work the same for the person right next to them. Everything that we do with magic does have an aspect of psychology, because in a lot of things we are combating the mind, the conscious mind and the subconscious mind specifically, where we form biases and gaps in information are filled by whatever your own biases deem appropriate. So we have to, a lot of the times, work against these automatically forming concepts and biases that may actually end up stopping us from interacting with something greater. There's a couple of the entities that I work with specifically that do deal with this as well. There's one that I consider closer than most, where I don't know what to call it, the presence itself, just entering the room, inspires a sort of primal fear, where no matter how many times you invoke them, no matter how many times you see them, that first sight will always give you that same instinctual, I am in danger feeling. And I feel like that is a common thing when dealing with things of our realm of understanding. And one person's immediate reaction may have been to draw the lines and say, okay, this is where you stop. I'm going to take command now. And another person's may have been to flee immediately. But my theory on this, of course, is that one person found their lines. They drew their protective circles and the like, and it worked for them to deal with their demon. And it may not work as well for anyone else, but that's what worked for one person, and so it just got passed down. Especially, back in the day where all of these, specifically the ceremonial styles, originated. That's kind of how it was. If it worked for one person, it's got to work for everybody else. And who can blame them? Because, I mean, if the alternative is to lick a rock and die of some horrifying disease or something like that, and talking about the alchemists and everything, you probably want to believe the guy that said, this plant is poisonous and this plant is not. Because obviously, it worked for him. So it's going to work for me too. Magic is not like that. Magic is very much a dance of your psyche and something that is outside of your comprehension, that is trying to communicate with you. And that is one thing that I will note, is that when you get past the first hurdles of fear, a lot of these things, a lot of these entities that people call gods or demons do actually want to communicate with you. They just don't want to waste their time. So you have to work with as I said, your own mind, your subconscious biases and everything like that. And that's why, for instance, you look at even ideas of the wolf and the crow and these archetypal animals or even shapes. It doesn't always mean the same thing between different cultures. Some people may call a black bird an omen of death. Some people may call it an emissary of their god, and who knows, maybe their god is also death. But that's for them. Either way, it could be good, it could be bad. Some people see a black cat walking by as unlucky. I have 3. They're great, they're sweet, they're lovable, and it's not the same for everybody. And to believe that it would have to be the same for everybody, that the same exact formula is going to work in the exact same way for everybody, I think is just kind of begging for disaster.
Well, what you said was really interesting, because when you look at ceremonial magic and Solomonic magic, one of the things you hear a lot is that the rules work, and there's no point in deviating from them because we know the rules work. They do this. They get you the results that it's said that they do. And so what would be the point in trying to create your own rules when we have these dictations and these set of commandments, more or less, that are thousands of years old, and you would just be naive to try and divert around them. And so, and I've always kind of, in my opinion, magic is like it's like a playground. It's something that the best results come from experimentation and trying new things and and kind of coming up with your own stuff and seeing how you can basically where your will and intent will take you just by itself without trying to make it conform to one rule or the other. And so I think that's why your book really it impresses me in that way as well.
Thank you. And honestly, that is a very good thing to note on as well, because as I'm speaking of, magic being an interplay of psychology and, something else, something completely alien here, there is a fun little thing, and I kind of mentioned it before, where if you run into something that is a blank, your mind just can't comprehend it or doesn't comprehend it. There's a very large empty space there. Your brain starts filling in what it thinks makes sense. And when you work with magic, where you literally are bringing your subconscious mind and the unconscious mind, or some would say the collective unconscious mind, out into the open like this, there's a lot more room for error, and there's a lot more potential for these gaps that get filled in to be filled in with something way more powerful and very different. In my work, we generally call this a daemon. I think some people call it either tulpa or something like that. Basically, we see it all the time. People go through these ceremonial things and they want so hard to contact, I don't know, say an archangel or Lucifer or something. And so they do. Not the real one, but they contact something that may even just be their own subconscious reflecting back at them, telling them what they want to hear, what they think an entity like that would be saying. And that happens a lot. A lot of the times, and I've had ceremonial magicians come up to me and ask about these sorts of things as well. And I've heard stories comparing the two as well. I've had experiences myself, and we actually have a whole, basically a route, a system devoted to utilizing this for your own purposes. But there is a very distinct difference between this expression of your subconscious mind and this divine other. So as I was talking about it, we have this aspect of ourselves that kind of fills in those blanks, and we call it the daemon. And, of course, we have the system of working with this type of thing that I know it's a great, very inventive name, but it's the work of the daemon. It's something that is actually performed with quite a few currents, and they may call it different things and have slightly different techniques, but it's generally the same thing, where you purposefully call on this thing, this expression of your subconscious mind, and you use it to help you reach the other, because now you have an extension of yourself that is depersonalized. It's you, but it's not you. And the more that you believe that it is a thing, a certain entity or something like that, or an archetype, the more power it has. And unfortunately, a lot of times in ceremonial magic, they do this unknowingly. They just think they contact an archangel, and when, as we've mentioned before, what kind of archangel is going to give a fuck about you? Sorry. I know you said not to curse, but it's true.
No, that's totally fine.
We said not to curse a lot.
And so specifically with this, And as I said, I have had um, ceremonial magicians talk to me about those because there are those that can see the difference and those that cannot. So one of the dangers is not necessarily that this demon will potentially break your seals and destroy you or anything like or possess you. No, one of the bigger dangers is you'll basically turn yourself mad by believing that you've summoned this thing that is so horribly dangerous and could rend your sanity that it actually does. And it's primarily just your subconscious mind wishing it could happen because so many people get into the occult because they wish something interesting would happen to them. They wish for something more. And,
I'm guilty of
well,
that.
admittedly, so am I. But I have also had those experiences where I guess I can't say that it's, the stereotypical sort of like world-shaking thing, even though a lot of them were. They're a lot more subtle. It's a lot more personal. Um, it's a lot more of no one else in the world would have understood what just happened except for me, right then, right there, and that means a lot more, at least to me.
Well, I think that one of I think we've talked about Liber Null and chaos magic and how that kind of works into this. And one of the big things about chaos magic is that personal gnosis trumps everything, basically.
Yes.
And so I think I personally, that's what I believe, and that has helped me understand my own path and in magic and what I want it to be and things like that. But talking about daemons and tulpas and things like that, I wanted to ask you about the spirits that you contact. How did you find them? What was your first contact with them? What was your initial introduction to them, and how did you, form a relationship with them?
Well, as you know from reading the Codex, there's 9 of them specifically,
Yes.
and it was a bit of a sequence. The first one I met unknowingly. It was the source of the shadow people that I would see as a kid. Um, he only ever called himself the Shadow, and appears in either multiple or a singular form. Could be just one singular shadow, or could be many of them surrounding. Could also just appear as an insect. Um, and that was probably the first one that I ever actually contacted unwittingly, but then later on purposefully. From then, as I said, I kind of just wanted to make friends. I kind of wanted to see why they were following me, what they had to say, if there was something special about it, or if I was actually in danger, or what was going on. And it seemed to come down to um, curiosity, um, on their part and on mine, because not everyone sees shadow people, of course. Not everyone sees Bigfoot. Not everyone sees hell. Not everyone sees the color blue. So it was just a matter of I could see them. I took the time and asked them questions, and they're like, "Why not?" From there, uh, I was basically on a quest to find other things like it, and it offered to introduce me. So I listened and followed its instructions, and that came about with the kind of revelation that I'd also been speaking to a second, which at this time is known primarily as Apsakesh. He's kind of the gatekeeper. Um, he kind of does the introductions, and any time that the others are involved, he, at least in these ceremonial routes, he's there to kind of open the gates for them and for you. So in those same situations, excuse me. So in those same situations, the only ones to ever initiate contact without Afsikesh are going to be Zelsamon, the Shadow, and Barakesh. Barakesh is an interesting one because he is what I believe is called the scribe. He's a watcher. He's if Afsikesh is the one that keeps the gate, Barakesh is the one that holds the key, and he primarily deals with the knowledge, the communication. It's associated with Mercury and with blackbirds, though primarily for me, that manifests as vultures. Big black vultures that always show up. And when we did a specific rite for him, and I guess were successful, he gifted us with a dead vulture on our lawn, which was a wonderful smell, and had a crazy energy about it. But then from there, we met the one Lhasa, the serpent witch of the crossroads. She's also one that was very close to me because of the association with the snakes, but also how she communicates. At that point, I was finally getting to a point of actually being able to communicate with them in a way that felt natural and not requiring psyching myself up, I guess you could say. It started to feel like I was just talking to a friend. From there, Lhasa governs basically communication with three others. So she was our gateway to them. They were Sathane, Nadzoth, and Paratheth. And from there, basically, I was curious as to what more there could be. At the time, I was basically living with a bunch of hippies. And they were viewing it as, because they were here with me with the whole thing, the whole experience, and they loved it. They were just all about oh, these entities, maybe we can just bring them into the light and see them for what they are, and they're not actually so dark and evil. They're just misunderstood. And I was like, well, yeah. they still would probably prefer you dead, but yes. So they helped, and they were kind of pushing towards making a catalog of these entities, and were saying importance in numbers. And I was like, well, most important number to me in my life has been the number 9. Everything has always revolved around 9. And I asked Barakesh and I asked Afsikesh, why is that? If this is specifically for me, if this is all surrounding me, and you're all related to this in this way, then would there not be 9? And all that whole conversation with them dealt a lot with what I would consider to be a bout in solipsism. So I had questions about my existence and the nature of reality. So I had, in going through that, I had a lot of questions with them about the nature of reality, and they spoke in riddles, of course, but eventually answered. And so Zelsamon basically said, yes, there are 9, and I don't want to meet the rest. But I did. And the last 2 were Tathos, and one that the only one that I actually gave a name to other than Zelsamon, because, I mean, if I just called him the Shadow, that's just going to sound like I'm trying to be edgy. But so Zelsamon was the poisonous shadow. I gave him that name because he wouldn't give his own. The rest of them gave me their names, but Zelsamon and this other one, I had to give them a name because there was nothing else. This final entity, experiencing that one did actually change my life entirely. It was probably the closest you could get in my opinion, to meeting God in a near-death experience without ever closing your eyes. Um, it's probably what I would say is the purest aspect of what uh, what I describe as the other, this force that is completely alien and outside intelligence, something that is way beyond our understanding, but somehow in certain ways just like pricks a little hole in our reality, and a little bit of strange light shines through that doesn't make any sense. And I gave that entity the name of Moloch because it was fire and it was transformation, and it was made very clear that this was the king of them. This was the alpha, the ruler of them, and the rest were aspects or emanations of Moloch. So I chose Moloch partly because it does mean king or king of all, and because it was that terrifying. You know, the concept back from the original accounts of worship of Moloch, and how terrifying it was, and how horrendous the worshippers were. Those were the experiences, the emotions that I felt, and it was absolutely phenomenal. There was it was an absolute breaking of any duality, where pain and joy and fear were all the same thing, and it was probably the most insane thing that I've ever experienced when I was not on psychedelics or any sort of drug. I was completely sober for that, which was the craziest part. And since then, I've seen him in other formats, and what's even crazier is other people have seen him and contacted him, and have heard him speak. And that's how I knew that this was something that I had to continue pursuing. When my experiences were also experienced by other people, and not just a bunch of hippies that were smoking all the time and probably would have believed anything you told them. But people across the world actually experiencing the same thing, and without any leading or anything like that, they have the same visions and the same words even spoken to them at times. And that, it was absolutely life-changing.
Now that I am very envious of these experiences, because that kind of goes into what one of my motivations for magic is, and what you said about people having these same experiences with these entities that you did. That leads me into a question that I had been wanting to ask you for a while, which is the idea that, well, first let me ask, how much physical evoking do you do in your tradition? I mean, how often do you evoke these entities into a physical form in order to have contact with them?
Honestly, I don't personally do that as much because I don't really prefer it. I personally much prefer the sort of possession trance, the invocation. I feel like evocation a lot of the times does lead itself to mistranslation, whereas an invocation, you can literally just experience it. And definitely there are certain times where an evocation is necessary. And with these, there are certain times where an evocation is the only option. You don't have a choice in that one. You call on them and they appear, or maybe they'll just show up. That kind of happens often with Zelsamon. He likes to do that. But the evocation is not really my thing.
That's fair. I'm still new to it, so. But the question I wanted to ask you was, and I suppose this could work for invocations as well, if you decided that you were going to invoke a specific entity, and someone else, let's say you're in Florida and I'm in Maryland. Let's say if I wanted to invoke the same entity that you did on the same night at the same time and did everything properly, is it possible that we would both be entered by the same entity, or would only one of us experience it, or is it possible that another entity that could come through to you that would be different than for me? Is that even a thing, or am I kind of misunderstanding the locality of the entities?
I guess that depends upon how many questions you have like that during the actual invocation. Because once again, when working with magic, you are making a dance of your own psyche and something that is outside of it. So if you do have questions during a ritual, if you do have doubts, then it can send things very much in a different direction. And so if during that rite where we're both doing the same thing and trying to invoke the same entity at the same time, if there is a moment's hesitation and a thought, what if this doesn't work? Then, well, good luck. But if, for the sake of argument, we do all at the same time, there's no questions or doubts or anything like that, then there'd be no problem for us both to experience the same thing, or the same entity rather. And I 100% believe that it would be individual as well. So you would have your own experience and I would have my own experience. And there may be absolutely no crossover, and there may be crossover. There have been times when I've been invoking a spirit that another person has been working with in some format, or I've had basically, I guess I like to call it a nudge from one of the spirits that someone is working with. There's the whole locality thing, and the question of that, as you mentioned, you just have to remember they are not from this space time. None of that makes any difference to them. The whole, Florida versus Maryland versus China, I mean, versus 10,000 years ago, they don't care. That's not what this is about. A lot of things you may even find, especially working with something that is truly of what I call the other, you may find that you're experiencing the effect before the cause. And that's a weird thing you have to get used to. But time, literally, and space, it does not make any difference to them.
And I think, and I understand that, and I've read into on that note and things like it, and I'd be very interested to see what that would be like, as kind of like an experiment, on the nature of them and how they interact with multiple people at one time. When you bring up the other, it brings up a question, and I've brought this up to you before. When people talk about the other, they're usually referring to the paranormal in a very general sense, and it's usually done in a way to avoid intellectual dishonesty, because I think a lot of people want to say that ghosts are ghosts, or ghosts are the spirits of dead people. Bigfoot is an ape in the woods, and aliens are entities from another physical place. How did you come to the term other, and how would you describe it compared to that kind of definition?
So I came to that term specifically because of what I would like to call a consonic synchronicity, where especially in linguistics, this happens a lot, where a word's going to sound the same as something else, but it doesn't have the same meaning or origin, but it comes to you, and this is the difference here, is when that correlation comes to you at a very specific time. A lot of the times, if you're looking for something, or if you're thinking about something, and then you just notice, hey, this looks or sounds like this, and then I just kind of go on down rabbit holes like that. And again, a lot of times they have no actual correlation, but the fact that she saw it right then, right there, and it was that close means that it is basically just for you. It's coinzonic. It's just for your psyche right then and there to make sense to you and only you, and it would be absolutely stupid to anyone else. So that's basically where I came to it because, and then I stuck with it because it makes sense. Because what I'm contacting, what I'm trying to make clear to people is that this is not from here. This is not something that is flesh and blood, solid, works off of the same processes that we do. And especially in these days where we have the media that we do that has, demons portrayed in a certain way, or spiritual things portrayed in a certain way, or even paranormal in general things portrayed in a very specific way, we have to understand that with a lot of these, we don't understand it. And specifically with the spiritual and in these entities, this type of entity, you actually can't understand it as you currently are. Where we are in this physical world, your brain literally cannot comprehend it. You try to, and you will have a short. your synapses will just not.
It's a very Lovecraftian idea.
It really is, and that's one of the things that originally drew me to him, because that's exactly what happens. And whether he knew that or not, I don't know. But at the very least, he could have stumbled upon the truth, and that happens often too. The point is that the entity is from something that does not follow our space-time rules. Cause and effect doesn't happen the same way. So what we see and what we experience isn't always exactly what it actually is. It's just what our brain and our subconscious kind of masks it with to help us understand. That's the whole point of a name, is just a simplified version of what that is, to help us understand what it is. It isn't that thing exactly, but it will help us to understand it. And that's the closest thing that I could find was other. It's something else. And a lot of depictions of demons, of angels, of gods, it was one thing. And when I was searching for a way to describe them and people that have had similar experiences, it's like, yeah, wow, Odin, Set, Osiris and Horus and all this. Yeah, those are one thing, but this was something else. This is other. And that's kind of where I settled on it, because there's literally no way to describe it. And I feel that, as you mentioned, like the cryptids, various, and ghosts and things like that, I feel, sure, there may be very specific things that these things are. But in my experience, a lot of the times, if not all of the times, it's the brain literally masking the experience with something that would make sense to them. And, that's not to say that they made the experience up. More than likely, they did experience something very shocking, very crazy, possibly not of this that we are experiencing here. But to kind of shield their own psyche, their brain created a mask for this experience. And that happens, I'd say, a lot more with the more intense ones, or the ones that are, like, say, I have an experience with the Ravenmocker I talk about a lot, where I 100% see, if that or a Skinwalker or Wendigo comes around, and if you don't want to believe that that's what it is, then it's not going to look the same as to someone that sees that thing and says, that is a Wendigo, or that is a Skinwalker. It's going to look different, because it's not necessarily of here. It doesn't necessarily follow our rules. But also, once again, it's the dance of the psyche and the spiritual. And your psyche is very, very powerful, and it can convince you of many different things. So if you and your buddy are walking down a dark road one night and you see a very large, probably a coyote or something like that, with, oh, well, maybe those legs are just a little bit too long. And then you notice that it stands up, and your friend's like, no, 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 we're getting out of here. And then later on, he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I just saw a dog. You know, that's two different experiences at that point. He's going to override his memory. He's going to completely deny it. And from that point on, to him, he will have remembered a dog. It's that simple.
That brings up so many interesting points about sort of where the thought patterns in the paranormal have been going for the last few years. One of the things you kind of mentioned was about perception and masking. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the term screen memory.
I have not, actually.
Okay, so one of the guys that kind of pioneered this term is an author by the name of Mike Cleland, and he has a book series called The Messengers, and in those books he describes the synchronicities and connections between owls and UFO abductions and UFO encounters. And a lot of experiences that people have written to him about is they have been driving or walking in the woods, and they see a 5-foot owl. And they're like, huh, that's an owl. And then they go home and they think to themselves, wait a minute, the owls aren't 5 feet tall. And his theory is that aliens are basically using our mind to like project an image that they think we are familiar with, but it's slightly distorted. It's slightly askew. It's kind of like an uncanny valley kind of thing. And I think that kind of stretches across the paranormal field as far as certain encounters. I think there are certain encounters that what they saw is what exists. Does that make sense? Like what they saw is what they saw. But then there are others where they will see something that it very well may have been not that there wasn't an entity there, but that it was so outside of it ourselves that our mind had to create some kind of familiar image for us to comprehend it. It just means that the skin was different, but the entity was in fact in existence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I'm talking about here, and that's another situation of I know that by a different name, but I know that.
Exactly, and I think that that just it stretches into so many different angles and fields, especially in your theories and in your philosophy. One of the things that I'm very interested in is, can you explain for us and the listeners the Noosphere and how that works and what it is and how you work with it?
So Noosphere is basically the sphere of thought. And in our work, specifically in how I use the term, it's the sphere of all human thought. And we go off of course, this is a kind of Gnostic sort of idea here as far as ontology. And so we have first, wisdom and thought and the mind and all of these things as the actual source of things, and from them emanates what we see and feel, and which we can trace back in the fact that, if you try and touch the table, you're not actually touching the table. It's the electrons and all of the itty bitty tiny microscopic and subatomic things that make up your fingers and your hand interacting with all of these same things that are on the table. So you're not actually touching anything. And how what you're seeing is nothing more than reflected light, which is, reflected or absorbed based off of various interactions of, once again, energies and subatomic particles. And then that is all processed by your brain, and it is just a very, very small sliver of what is actually out there. So bringing this back to uh, seeing the world around us as an interpretation of purely energy and when you get down to it, down to the quantum aspect of things, basically things that we're still trying to figure out exactly what it is. But you can keep drilling down further and further into what it is, and it's just weirder and makes less sense as we stand. Which actually, as an aside, they've been learning a great deal about it in the past few years, and it's really exciting. But anyway, the point is with the concept in our aspect of the noosphere is this places the core of reality itself purely in thought. And whether you want to say that thought generates reality itself, or that thought generates our perception of reality, it effectively becomes the same thing. Because when you get down to it, your perception of reality is all that there really is of reality. Because if you hear something and you hear it incorrectly, but it works just as well in the conversation and it doesn't skip a beat, did you actually hear it incorrectly? In the same way as with seeing things. So in the end, you bring it down to, once again, thought. And with this concept of thought being the basis, then the noosphere in this concept, in this ontological concept, is literally everything is thought. So this is, I guess you could say, taking it outside of just perception and more into the actuality. So
what you're
say,
sorry, go on.
Say that we take what I was just mentioning a step further, and how our concepts of touch, of experience, it's all just interpretations of the brain. That means that everything that we have and everything that we've experienced, and everything that we see, everything that we think, every memory that we have exists purely in our minds. And anything else is nothing more than a very stubborn bias of ours to help us along the way, to help us to continue working. So if you break down those biases, then you have thought swimming through basically a field of thought. And every experience that you have is just an interaction of thought. Say an identity being a pure aspect of a singular concept, and anything beyond that, like say the building of the ego to it, or certain descriptions of self, that becomes a more complex pattern of interlocking thoughts. So in the Codex Versum specifically, we're taking this aspect of swimming the noosphere, which you can interpret as astral projection or what have you. You can interpret it in a lot of different ways, to be honest, but the core of it is this. In the Codex Versum, we swim the noosphere, and that is our existence. And everything that we have, everything that we've ever experienced and ever will experience, is just that interaction. And so we have the choice and the ability as magicians to move this perception of our thoughts away from these complex interlockings that created our ego and biases, and free it from that so that we can look elsewhere within the noosphere, that we can shift our perspective to another side of it, another portion of it. And through that, through oneric work and through meditations, astral projection, things like that, and potentially, actually not potentially, but in further aspects, in manipulating the real world, we shift our perspective in the purest sense, away from the fetters of our ego, and it changes everything. And our goal is to reach the ends of the noosphere. Basically, if we see this sphere of all human thought, of everything in your mind. And this is where it goes back away from like the spiritual ontological concepts and down into the perception again, down into like I guess the easier to digest aspect of it, where it is just our perceptions and just our actual thoughts. We still have a body. We're still grounded. We're not talking about any of the crazy spiritual stuff. We're just thinking about, okay, I have these thoughts. I have these ways of going about things. So, say you want to find something new then. Say you want to think about something new then. The only way to find something new, if you're considering things as the entirety of your thought in a sphere, is to go where there are gaps, where there is a blackness, where there is a darkness, where there is nothing, where something doesn't make sense. And that's where you're going to find your edge. That's where you're going to find where, I guess you could say, the two extremes kind of become one. And that's kind of where we, as far as our system, go and seek. And so I like to try and be able to interpret it in both the purely spiritual mumbo jumbo that turns a lot of people off, and also in the practical aspect, because it's a very strange thought in general. But we can break it down to the simple fact that, think about two wide extremes. Even this is a simple one that we'll probably pull in that I know, Clive Barker will probably thank us for this one, pleasure and pain. People have already figured out how to bridge that. And the thought of, the Cenobites even was a concept of trying to bridge those two extremes. And of course that later went in, diverging into movies now, but like Event Horizon, where it was literally hitting the edge of the universe, where space and time stopped, and they reached something that was beyond our understanding, but for some reason melded the two of pleasure and pain, because the two widest extremes are really just one thing when you bring it down to the base thought. And now, in practicality, that may not be true. But as far as thought, that's where we want to go. We want to find that very specific, kind of like small crevice between the two of them, where our knowledge just gaps. And that's where we want to go, because we don't know what's there. We want to see, and what we may find may shake our entire concept of reality. And so far, that's kind of been leading us. And that's also why we call it a noosphere, because, I guess that one's a little bit more complicated to explain, because it's both a sphere and it's not. It's just kind of folded in on itself because we think it is instead of whatever. But the point is, we seek the edges of reality, and the best way to visualize that is to consider thought as a sphere, and to visualize our thinking as within that sphere, and seek the edge. Sorry, I know that was just like
no. That was
no.
But that was very in depth, and that gave me a lot to think about as far as how to formulate around that. What you were talking about mirrors a lot of thought that goes into consciousness, and the idea that consciousness is not local to the brain, and that it exists outside the brain, and that the brain, it works kind of like a radio signal, that the brain is acting as a radio, and it's picking up the signal as long as you live, and then when you die, it just kind of floats off back into the ethereal. And I've always really enjoyed that thought pattern, and I go down that rabbit hole a lot. And I think that's such a diverse way of looking at it, and it kind of encapsulates what the goal is in all of this, especially within Codex Versum. And so when you were talking about, finding the edge of reality, would you say that that is kind of where these spirits that you contact, where their domain is? And is it in a way to sort of become one with them, or sort of join with them to get out of this reality and into theirs?
100%. And not exactly to, I guess you could say, get out of this reality per se. Um, it is just the same as what I mentioned earlier, where what we experience is a very, very small portion of what is actually there. We can't see microwaves. We can't see ultraviolet. Um, we can't experience certain things, but maybe they can. Maybe the reason that they work the way that they do is because they do experience in this total wavelength, and our entire world, this noosphere, is just a small portion of it. So maybe not necessarily to escape this reality, but to reveal it to be what it truly is, whatever that may be.
The Lucifuge principle, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, and
Yeah.
the secrecy that is
Mhm.
so inherent to it. Um, why is it so inherent, and why is the obscurity so necessary for its correct action, if that makes sense?
So it's actually twofold. First off, it's because it's not our choice. It's not secret because um, we make it secret. It's secret because it's difficult to understand. It's secret because these things are very obviously not common knowledge, and most people couldn't understand it. If they saw it, they would look right by it and disregard it. Um, there's a lovely story of Shiva and Shakti that I paraphrase a lot, where um, Shiva basically made a bet with Shakti because he blessed the river Ganges, and she was like, "You're a fool because now everyone's going to come down and get these blessings, and uh, if everyone has the blessings, then no one's going to be blessed, and then it's just going to cause chaos. People will be fighting over it." And she was like, watch this." And so he goes down to the river, and he takes the form of a dying old man, and has Shakti uh, take the form of his wife, and they sat by the river where the worshippers of Shiva would go to bathe to get his blessings, and they would beg and ask for people to help them, and day after day, people would just pass them by. Nobles, uh, monks, all of them just pass them by. And then one day, an old homeless man, an old beggar, comes up, sees them, and hears their story and how this old man that Shiva is posing as is dying, and they need medicine. And the beggar says, "You know what? Supposedly, Shiva blessed this river. So if I take you and we bathe in the river together, you should be healed. So let's do that." And so he does, and he takes him down to the river, and voila, the old man revealed himself as Shiva and blesses the man tenfold. And he turns to Shakti and says, uh, "Even if I am directly in front of these people, they will never see. Only the people that actually truly know in their heart already will ever actually believe." And that's 100% the case with the occult. People see this every day. People pass by it. People are, I guarantee you, especially in larger cities, they're walking by some occultist that is probably that night going to be summoning some abomination into our world or something like that, or calling on their holy guardian angel, or trying to communicate with UFOs, various things, and probably even talking to their daemons right then and there, and they never know. And maybe part of that's our fault because we've made the paranormal such a commodity that we have
It's an
things like
industry. I mean, it's
exactly,
become such an industry over the years, and there's no way, and I think I get into this a lot with other paranormal enthusiasts, there's no way to bring it out of the joke world. It will always
yeah,
be a punchline forever, and I think you just
exactly,
have to accept it and work around that and kind of use that to your advantage to be able to go out and do the things that you want to do because it gives you a great cover of darkness, so to speak. Because, if you tell someone, like, oh, I'm going out looking for Bigfoot, they're going to laugh at you, but they're not going to, like, stop you. They're not going to, like,
yeah.
and it's this, it's kind of a, there's a duality to it that I don't think people realize. All right. So, and I don't want to continually make comparisons between Codex Versum, your philosophy, and the established Solomonic traditions. But the one question I had was because when we were talking to the ceremonial magician, the idea that the entities in the Goetia, they, for some reason, and I guess no one really knows this, they can smell stuff. And so it is often described and recommended that you use good smelling things, flowery fragrances, nice incenses to appease the spirits and make them more in line with working with you. Now, you take a different approach. A lot of the entities that you contact and work with, while yes, there are some that enjoy sweet smelling things. I don't remember which one it is, but you talked about apples dipped in bourbon.
Hmm. Yeah.
But you talk about the smell of death, the smell of decay, and things like that. And I'm just curious about the dichotomy between those two kind of things, about how these entities that you work with respond to these smells, and why that is what they respond to, whereas the goetic entities respond to sweet smelling things.
So the I'm not 100% certain as to the differences because on one hand, I do know, certain entities just do like certain smells. It's really that simple. Um, you know, uh, some of them will like honey or milk. I mean, that's a common thing over in India as well as offerings of milk and honey and various other things like that. Um, but others will enjoy fruits, flowers, and yeah, there's some that even in my pantheon, I guess you could say, do enjoy like certain flowery or herbal scents. But a big thing about the offerings with the nine is that it's not just about how it smells, it's about the associations. It's about the archetypal associations of what we think. So for instance, if you're offering a rose, um, you'd have to think, okay, what does a rose mean to me and to my society? How as an archetype, what would a rose be? And you have to look at, okay, so the flower, but also the thorns and the smell and the innate sort of like concept of it being something feminine, things like that. And that's what I found is more along the lines of the reasons why um, they enjoy the scents. Not necessarily because of the scent, probably, but because of the associations to that concept. So, for instance, some of them enjoy blood or certain meats or things like that. But for ours, for the nine in general, all of them will happily accept offerings of funerary incenses and rotting or dead things. And this is because of the negative associations. Because we're looking for something and reaching out to something that is outside of our concept. And I guess easiest way that we can find that merger of the two extremes that I was mentioning before, the easiest way for us to find um, that is also to delve into the taboo and into things that generally make people squeamish and um, generally terrified. Anything that people are your average sane person would be averse to is something where we can generally find a gateway to the other, um, and that's resonates as well in the Agori uh, in Eastern traditions, where they eat of the dead and their own feces sometimes, and they have the skull caps, the kapala that they eat and drink from. They meditate on the funeral pyres, and they generally just live in either cemeteries or up in the mountains away from everyone. And the thought is, all is God, so there is nothing that is profane. Um, so that's kind of the deal here, except this we see is if everything is holy, but this aspect is considered profane, then that must mean it is uh, much more potent. Which I guess we go from a lot of old heretical Judeo mystical concepts on that. I believe there was someone who actually specifically had a gospel that was like that too. But um, our entities that we worship, that we work with, just attach to and feed off of the rot and the aspects of decay and the agents of decay, like the breaking down of organic material. And some of them will go with flowers or fruit. Others prefer meat. Just that simple.
What you said about the idea that using scents and materials that would cause someone to be squeamish or disgust them, and there being power in that association, it reminded me very much of sigil magic, in the sense that one of the ways that many people charge a sigil is to go through some kind of elevated emotion, and it seems that fear and disgust is one of the most powerful charging methods of a sigil.
Yes, it's also one of the most primal aspects that's easily accessed. And we have a lot of other primal emotions, but the negative ones affect us the most. And those negative primal emotions that are just like things that are involuntary, those can most easily pierce our psyche and allow things to enter or exit as needed.
And I find great inspiration in that, and I resonate with that a lot in a lot of my own dealings and a lot of my own thought processes on deity work and how to appease them and form some kind of reciprocal relationship with them. Cain, I just want to say that this has been such a pleasure. We've been looking forward to this interview for a long time, and we're really glad we were able to have you on and to discuss these things, and we were really excited to have you back on in the future.
Of course, just give me a call anytime.
We absolutely will, and you have a great night.
You as well.
Bye.
Bye.
And that was our talk with Cain Del Sol. We really enjoy having him on, and we're going to have him on again very, very soon for roundtable episodes and a follow-up to his book. All of his links for his music and his book are in the show notes below. And again, if you would like to become a patron and get exclusive content, it's $4 a month, and you get new episodes, stickers, patches, pins, and the opportunity to be on the show. So with that, we all hope you have a great night, and we will see you again in the Strange Dominions.